You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
I think if I ask people to raise their hands in this room, if you've been touched by Alzheimer's disease, I know that every single person in this room would raise your hand. So it's a disease that we want to conquer. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce today Dr. Maria Carrillo. She's one of the warriors in the fight against Alzheimer's. She comes to us from Chicago, from the headquarters of the Alzheimer's Association, and her official title is Chief Science Officer of Medical and Scientific Research. So she's responsible for things like the oversight of the association's granting process, communication of scientific findings. She also manages an annual association international conference. So it's the largest international conference that discusses Alzheimer's and related dementia. She manages the Research Roundtable, which brings pharmaceutical companies together where they look at the trends and related therapeutics for Alzheimer's. And she is involved with the Worldwide Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, ADNI. And our University of Iowa became involved in some ADNI studies due to Maria coming here and working with, and Gary, and working with Dr. Susan Schultz and others at the university. She received her PhD from Northwestern University, completed a postdoctoral fellowship in neurological sciences at Rush Medical Center in Chicago, taught there. In addition to many, many accomplishments, she's a wife. I think these are really important as well. A wife, a mother, and a great friend to many. But my best thing about Maria is that she has this incredible energy, enthusiasm, outgoing personality, and she rivets her knowledge and her focus on ending this terrible disease. So she's a wonderful advocate for defeating Alzheimer's. So I introduce you, Maria, Dr. Maria Carrillo.
Well, thank you so much. It's so great to be here again. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces as well. I'm hoping that I have to figure out how to do. Yeah, sorry. Is it up here?
Yep.
Great. And yay. Okay. That's good. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm not too technology challenged, so thank you all for being here again. You know, it was interesting. I was having a conversation in Chicago with some friends that were visiting from a different country, and we were talking about philanthropy and what I do. And I was last week I was in Oklahoma with a family foundation that gave us $5 million for research, and I was thanking them and meeting with their board and the third generation of family members that were, donating and devoting, their family's fortune to education and to health. And somebody asked me from another country, they're like, how does that happen here? That people just give, they're so philanthropic. And it was interesting because, I've traveled all over the world, as some of you have. I know I was talking to, our friends here earlier, Rotarians that have been to international meetings in so many places. And actually, when you think about philanthropy, the United States and I'd say the United Kingdom are the two top countries for philanthropy in the world. And it's a very unique thing. I think is a very unique contribution, something I'm very proud of. And we all, for example, may have our top 3 charities of choice. We grow up thinking this way. We grow up knowing that we're giving back and that this is part of what we do with the community. And it's a very unique thing in this country. I'm very proud of it. And I think when I hear and I come and visit, the Rotary Club, it's that spirit that moves me. And I think that's why when Gary and LaDonna, talk about their own work in literacy, and I can read programs and things that they do. I mean, they are, they embody what we're trying to do as Americans. So thank you all very much, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I keep coming back, even though I'm all over the world, and I'm spending 2 days in Chicago in the month of October, but I'm still going to come out and talk to Gary, and I'll come out and talk to folks for you too, Richard, but you got to go through my agent. Okay. Well, thank you all very much again, and it's wonderful to be here. You all know about the Alzheimer's Association. You all know that our leadership is here, Melissa Pence, and she was introduced earlier. Without our offices and our leadership around the country, we wouldn't be able to deliver on this mission. And you all know these statistics, so I don't have that much time to talk to you, and I want some time for questions and answers, because I know there's probably a lot that you have, that you're thinking about that I might not touch. But you know that unfortunately, this epidemic continues to grow, and we're very concerned about the numbers, because this is only the beginning of sort of the beginning of the wave of the 20 years of baby boomers that are starting to turn over 65, and so we know that's affecting us on many levels, not only retirement levels, but certainly healthcare and other things that we're doing to try to ensure that as we age, we reinvent ourselves, maybe find second or third professions and careers and volunteer opportunities to keep ourselves engaged and continue to give to the community, because we have so many talents and gifts. But we also want to make sure that we are healthy and our brain is healthy as well as we age, so we're able to do that. And so that's really the biggest message that we have to convey, not only to the state governments, but to the federal government in the United States. Many of you have advocacy champions, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I just wanted to flash this just to make sure that all of you were aware of all of the great work that Melissa Pence and her team, which is here also, that do for us on the ground here and across the country, leaders like herself around the United States. So just want to make sure you all are aware of that, because they're here, and you can access services, and everything we do, of course, is also freely available for all of our families affected by this disease. But I will talk a little bit about advocacy, because when people ask me what my hope is for the future, I hope that these next few minutes with you will convey what that hope looks like. For me, it starts with the fact that our federal government is finally acknowledging the fact that Alzheimer's disease has to be solved, and is finally starting to fund it to the same level it's funded other diseases that have made great progress. Diseases like heart disease, like cancer, which is making good strides in finding treatments and even cures, and also HIV, which has changed the face of the way we think about AIDS today. We don't die of AIDS. HIV is a chronic disease. So how do we do this then for Alzheimer's? Well, it's happening, and certainly started with the national plan that we finally were, I think, the 8th country to have a plan, so we weren't first in that. But that plan really outlined some strategies, and those strategies led to some wins that started in 2012. And our organization, and we're very proud to be the ones that wrote this plan and put it before Congress, and that President Obama happened to be in office at that time and signed that. And here we are in 2012, we had $50 million programmed for by the administration. In 2013, we got sequester relief. You all remember the sequestration. In 2014, we got $125 million added. And what was interesting there is that $25 million of that was targeted for care and support. So it's not just research. They recognize that you also have to think about how we're going to care and support our families around the country. But here we are, in December 2015, you probably remember, we got our first biggest bolus added to the base, $350 million. Amazing, in a time where no other disease in the past decade has gotten a very specific allocation. This is a huge win. And then this past June, you probably remember that there was an announcement that in the bill, there's another $350 million that was added. Now, $400 million came from one part of the Congress, $350 the other. We're hoping it's either somewhere in between, or at minimum $350. So what does that look like? Well, we started off at about $448 million. In comparison, let's think about that. In comparison to cancer, which is about $6 billion, heart, $5 billion, HIV, $4.5 billion, and Alzheimer's, less than $500 million. Okay? And little by little, we started climbing. That's what all of the wins that I shared with you look like. And now we're really slated to hit almost $1.4 billion finally in this coming year. And that's really exciting. And I'm also very humbled by the fact that I was asked by the National Institute on Aging to participate in the council, the National Council, and I started just about a year ago, that actually decides on where this money is going to be spent. So not only do I get to work with our own scientists to decide where our philanthropic dollars should be spent, I also work with the federal government to ensure that this money is spent well. So I'm very proud to be representing our organization at that level. But we understand also that it's critical to have philanthropy. Philanthropy is important. You know that because that's what you do as well. That's your mantra. Well, association funding is a little bit different. I just want to clarify that because we do have great, things happening at the federal government, but we still need a lot of good philanthropy. It can be precisely targeted. We are global. We fund all over the world, like you are, a global organization, because that's where there are needs. And I will tell you, we fund in 21 different countries because there are needs around the world as well. So federal funding is also key, and that's what's going to get us to that next level. And they will sometimes be more conservative, and we as an organization don't have to be. We can take some higher risks, which we expect higher yield from, but we can take some higher risk. So they're actually complementary of each other. They're not in competition, and that's why it's great that we work very closely with our federal government to spend their dollars. So I'm going to share with you that what we do is, right now we have 320 active projects, about 84, almost 84 million actually now, because we just awarded $4 million worth last month, in 21 different countries. And in 12 of those countries, we're the largest funder of Alzheimer's research in that country. So that's why it's so important that philanthropy be there, because the cure can come from anywhere, interesting science comes from anywhere, and we fund best in class. And if that best in class happens to be in South America, we're going to fund that. So, and that's, I think, something that's very unique, but you can all understand as Rotarians because you're a part of an international organization that does something very similar. And we're proud to be the most impactful nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's disease in the world, according to Thomson Reuters Web of Science. So if you compare us to the federal government, we're actually with federal governments, plural, we're actually number 3, because the top is the National Institutes of Health. The second is the Chinese Ministry of Health, interestingly enough. And then we're the third. And then the fourth is the European Commission. So we're up there. We're pretty proud of that. And I'm grateful to all of you, for example, who join WALK and who do all kinds of things for us as an organization and support us, because all of those dollars contribute to what we're able to do also in research. So I'm going to switch to a little bit of science now, because I'm going to cover, last year we spoke, and I spoke a little bit more broadly about not only the disease, but about our organization. And today I'm going to talk to you about some exciting things that are happening in therapies, because that's really where, again, I see that hope for the future. And we understand now more than ever that we talk about Alzheimer's disease, but Alzheimer's disease is a mixture of several different types of changes that are happening in the brain that sometimes can overlap or look like other dementias. And that other dementias are also usually never in isolation. They are mixed dementias. But the most common is Alzheimer's, then vascular dementia. Many of you probably know somebody with some of these other dementias as well. Dementia with Lewy bodies is an example. Frontal temporal dementia is another. There are different types. The underlying changes, brain changes, in all of these, you can find somebody with Alzheimer's disease, which with their main diagnosis is Alzheimer's, that has brain changes very similar, that could be Lewy body as well. So it's a complicated disease as we age. So we're trying to understand that. And we're trying to understand how we would treat that. Because if it's not a singular disease alone and there could be other things happening, how would you treat that more successfully if it's complicated underneath? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, first of all, the tenets of what it means to have Alzheimer's. Certainly Dr. Alzheimer's on the bottom, diagnosing the first patient, Augusta D on the top, found plaques and tangles. Plaques made up of amyloid, tangles made up of tau. There will be a test, so remember those proteins. And this is a memory test because this is Alzheimer's. So plaques made of amyloid beta, and tau, the tangles made up of tau. So what's interesting is that we continue to use this as a hallmark for the disease. So this is what there has to be at death, if you have an autopsy, for it to be Alzheimer's disease. If you don't have one of these, it wasn't Alzheimer's. Okay, you have to have both. But now we understand that there's also vascular changes. There are so many other proteins that might be associated with other dementias that I mentioned earlier, and it's a complex, it's a complex disease. So what we're starting off with is something like this. We have a clinical spectrum, right? You have cognitively normal people with mild cognitive impairment, that MCI in the middle, and then maybe frank dementia, some brain changes, memory changes associated with a dementia. And then We know that amyloid beta, which is in the plaques, remember, this is a test, this is a recall test, is there, and then we might have the tau in the good job, in the tangles, and then we might have other things like alpha-synuclein and other dementias. We might have some TDP-43 abnormalities, which are very closely associated with memory changes. We might have vascular disease, which as we age, it happens actually, and certainly if we have high blood pressure and other cardiovascular diseases may be exacerbated. And then there are other things that we've heard of, inflammation, insulin resistance, sort of the diabetes angle. There are lots of other possibilities. Lots of things that could all contribute to this clinical spectrum that we're calling memory changes as we age leading up to dementia. So how do we deal with all of that if it's such a complex system? Well, I'm going to show you this slide because I'll tell you that there's lots of therapeutics out there for Alzheimer's disease that are in the works. So this is phase 1, the very early phases of clinical study, mostly pharmaceutical, but some of these are biotechs, and some of these could be happening in academic centers like yourselves, like what centers you have here in Iowa City. And this is what this means is these are first in man, so these are very early. They might take quite a few years to see if they actually work. But the good news is that we have that many, and that's good for Alzheimer's. I'll tell you, if we were looking at a cancer, slide, there'd be hundreds. So we need more, okay? But this is what it looks like now. This is a good slide. It's phase 2. This is the next phase, right? A little bit larger study, a little bit more to make sure that safety and tolerability are there. This is good. And so we have lots of different types of targets here, not only looking at amyloid beta, but also looking at the tau and also looking at inflammation and so many other targets. This is good news for the disease. It means we are tracking towards being able to understand maybe a polypharmacy approach. How do you approach Alzheimer's with multiple different types, like a cocktail approach, just like we do for HIV and cancer in reality, and even heart disease. So this is the trial. These are the trials that are closest to potentially us getting in our doctor's office, us getting a prescription, right? These are the ones that are in phase 3. They're official registration trials. That means they are powered enough, they are large enough that if they're efficacious, the FDA would approve them, would seriously consider approving them. So that's that list. It's a good size list. The one you see on the bottom, you might have seen in the news about a month or two ago, or certainly at our conference, at the Alzheimer's Association's International Conference, Tau-Rex, the first tau drug to come to phase 3, and unfortunately it did not have positive results. There were some hints that there were some parts of it that might work, but we'll have to see what else is presented on it. They are presenting in a couple of conferences coming up some additional information, so maybe we'll see what's going on there. And I think all of you are very familiar with aducanumab. That's at the very top on the left, on your left-hand side, the second one down, aducanumab by Biogen. It was recently in the news that had a great phase 2 trial. The phase 2 trial was about 120 people, small, and it originally reported at our conference a year ago, made a big splash. The reason it made a big splash again is because it officially published in a journal. But to be honest with you, the phase 3 trial is already launched. So it's open for enrollment. You can talk to Melissa about sites nearby or sites if you're interested in joining that clinical trial. It is very exciting. And one of the things that made that trial unique is that in its early phase, it actually made sure that everybody in the trial had the protein that they were trying to treat. That drug is an anti-amyloid drug. It tries to take amyloid out. Well, believe it or not, before we had biomarkers, and I'll show you a little bit more about biomarkers, we had enrollments of 3,000, up to 3,000 people in a clinical trial for Alzheimer's disease, maybe taking out amyloid, and probably a third of those people didn't have amyloid, because we didn't know how to visualize whether they had amyloid. Remember, dementia can have multiple causes. And so we were setting ourselves up for failure. If you are familiar with statistics, you're really not going to see a signal if 25% of your population or 30% does not have what you're looking for. So this changed the game, and that's why the aducanumab study is so exciting. That's why it was in the news, and that's why we're so hopeful for the phase 3 study that's going on now in 50 different sites across 40 countries over the next few years. So we're hopeful for that one. So I just wanted to point that out. And then there are a lot of trials that are just academic trials that are moving towards that direction, so won't spend time on that. But there are therapeutic agents also in development for other dementias. okay? And this is why I'm saying that these other targets, these other potential targets for the disease, for just dementia in general, they're being pursued so that we have the possibility in the future, if these are successful, to really tackle dementia almost, not just Alzheimer's disease, but dementia as a whole. And that's really hopeful. So what does this look like now? You've seen all of this. We've got our different potential causes, and there are more, right? And this is not in isolation. And then really, we want to be able to measure those, because ideally you want to have a biomarker, and you want to say, look, Maria, you have vascular changes, and you have some A beta and some tau. So that means I'm going to treat vascular as well as Alzheimer's, and as well as both of those parts. Maybe my husband, who has Alzheimer's, unfortunately, in his family, and my mother-in-law is the third of 4 siblings to have a diagnosis with Alzheimer's, and their father died of it. So it's very strong in our family, and I have 4 children that I'm thinking about, that I'm in a hurry to get a treatment for, because we don't know what will happen as it comes down in that hereditary line. So we're thinking, how do we make sure that we understand the full spectrum of these biomarkers and understand who needs what? Maybe my husband might have another different type of form, or other things that contribute to that disease. Well, those are coming. And those are there, you see them, I think they're in like orange or brown on your screen. And there are different types of things, like at the top, PET scans that you probably heard of, that you're doing here, actually, out of ADNI. ADNI studies a biomarker study, and it is now, Susan Schultz is just leaving University of Iowa, but there are others that are taking over that project that's looking at biomarkers across the lifespan. So it's very important that that work is being done here. You can also pull lumbar fluid. How many of you know how to do that? What that means? It means a lumbar puncture, so not everybody's happy about that. But I will tell you, it gives you a lot of great information about the proteins in the brain, because it's the fluid that bathes your brain. So so PET and CSF are really front runners, but MRIs, which you have here, are also very much in play. So there are also a lot of diagnostic agents at the FDA that are being tested. So this is just a snapshot of them, okay? We keep track of these on a monthly basis. We make sure that we know what's out there, what's moved off of the list, what's potentially being approved, and what's coming up in the pipeline. So we track all of this. Lots of great things are happening in this space. But I'm going to highlight one thing. We talked about amyloid imaging. We talked about the PET scan. And on the top, you see that normal scan of a normal person over 65. On the bottom, you see a person with Alzheimer's disease, because this PET scan specifically lights up where the plaques are. And the plaques are made up of amyloid. So this is for amyloid. It's amyloid imaging. When we first, the Alzheimer's Association first invested, one of our largest grants at the time, about almost 10 years ago, invested in ADNI for the first time. We embedded PET imaging because no one else would. The federal government had no money at the time, and they said, we don't have another $2.5 million to embed amyloid imaging into the ADNI study. So we raised our hand and said we would do it. And so we funded PET amyloid in that study. Now, ADNI is a study, as I mentioned to you, that's a biomarker study of natural history as we age over decades. 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Some of those people do not have Alzheimer's disease. Actually, a third were normal. And a third had slight problems called mild cognitive impairment, that we didn't know if it was due to Alzheimer's or something else. And then a third had Alzheimer's. Well, as you looked at this study, and as you looked at the years where people were amazing volunteers coming back, every 6 months to get tested, we saw and learned that 25% of the individuals with no memory problems, they were normal, already had amyloid in their brain. What's that? Why do they already have one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's? They don't have Alzheimer's, they're normal. They're walking around, they're tested, it's proven that they're normal. So what is amyloid? Is amyloid a precursor? Is it a spark? Does it have nothing to do with it? Which could very well be. These are theories and hypotheses. We have to prove them. Well, right now, what is being pursued is the possibility that amyloid is a little bit like cholesterol. That cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease, that you go to the doctor, you can get diagnosed with high cholesterol early on. You might have a lifestyle change recommended to you. You might not do it, but you would have that recommended to you. You might have a statin prescribed, or other things, other medications. You lower your cholesterol, And you're not curing heart disease, right? You're not curing a heart attack, but you're decreasing the risk of a heart attack. And we have completely changed mortality in cardiovascular disease because of that, right? So perhaps amyloid is that early change. If you start pulling it out of the brain, you may then decrease the chances or slow cognitive decline sufficiently so that you're almost curing of the disease, but you're actually creating maybe a more chronic version of the disease, right? That's the exciting thing. So we're taking a page out of the cardiovascular disease world and trying to learn from it and see if we can apply that. Now, the other protein that I mentioned, tau, in the tangles, we've never been able, the last time I was here, I had a very quick picture of it because it was brand new. We've never been able to image tau in the brain, but now we can. Over the past 3 years, this has been developed, and it's very, very new still today. I would say, I think last time I was here, it was about 300 people on planet Earth had been scanned for tau. Now it's about 3,000. Okay, and there's an imaging agent that's in FDA at the FDA for approval, so that it can potentially be used in a doctor's office. So this is a picture of that right here. The top is your 80 minutes and then 100 minutes in the scanner. And then you have healthy individuals from your left to your right all the way to severe Alzheimer's disease. So this tau is in different places from the amyloid. And it is generally thought to track more with cognitive change as you age. Because these are actually, the tau is inside the cells. And so when they disrupt and basically die, the tau can be visualized because they kind of burst open and the tau is around, it's in the brain and you can see it. And so this is a really interesting way of being able to correlate the two hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease in a living brain without waiting for autopsy. This is exciting for treatment potentially as well as diagnosis. So this one's still experimental. Okay, the previous one you can get, now it's FDA approved. This is experimental. So, but it's an exciting opportunity to use these biomarkers. So what does this mean for Alzheimer's? It means that we used to be all the way at the right? We used to be diagnosing at dementia. Now we're a little bit better at diagnosing at mild cognitive impairment, but we're not always sure what type of impairment it is. Is it due to Alzheimer's? Is it due to insomnia? Is it a vitamin B deficiency? Is it because you're taking strange medications? Is it because there's a depression? We don't know many times. Now there's a way to actually understand what that impairment looks like because we have biomarkers. And then really where you see the preclinical sign there, that is really where we want to be in the future. We want to be able to diagnose Alzheimer's disease very similar to heart disease, like early cholesterol. You haven't had a heart attack yet, or treat blood pressure. You haven't had a stroke yet, but it may reduce your risk of having one. And that's really what we're targeting. There are multiple ways in which we can do this, because ultimately, if you can do that, you can target an individual therapy, which are the blue ones, right, out there, individual therapy for each one. So I can say, this is what you are looking at, this is what your spectrum looks like, and this is the medication I'm going to give you. This is a cocktail I'm going to give you. And I can visualize those either with a PET scan. I know what the orange or circles are because I can visualize them with a PET scan or with some other tool. That's the future of how we're going to treat dementia. It's really an exciting time. These are some trials that I don't have too much time to go into because of lack of time today. But I will tell you that this is already happening. This is already happening out there, and I will leave you with this, that in these trials are pushing the envelope. They're pushing the envelope by putting these experimental treatments that you just saw, including aducanumab that was in the news by Biogen, Eli Lilly, solanezumab, other drugs that take out amyloid, and they're putting them in people that do not have symptoms of cognitive change. They're normal people. They're selected in various ways to enrich the trial. It's not just anyone. They're selected, for example, if they have amyloid in their brain already, if they have a certain type of gene that increases your risk. Many of you have heard of this gene, ApoE4. They might have a family history. Do they have a first-degree relative? So there's a combination of things being used in these trials, or perhaps they have dominantly inherited Alzheimer's, where their parents have inherited it in their 30s or 40s. They get Alzheimer's disease, and then they know that their parent has it, so they will probably have it as well, right? If you get a gene test, you will find out if you have it. You have a 50-50 chance you didn't inherit it. So these are populations that are volunteering. They want to see what happens, and they're willing to take a potentially risky drug to see if they can stave off cognition, because as soon as we can see that that happens there, we can start to think about prevention of Alzheimer's the way we do preventing heart disease, heart attack, stroke. So it's a really exciting time, and that's the future. And we're proud of the fact that we've seed funded all of these to get them started, because our government was very skeptical. And that's okay, they're risk averse. But like I said, we as philanthropists can get things started. We're the ones that get the seed going, and then the federal government kicks in, and the rest is history, and we will change the trajectory of this disease. And it starts with philanthropy, and then we'll have great science behind it. And thank you all for your time today, because I know you'll have questions, but that's really the hope for the future, and I hope I've conveyed that to you. Thank you.
You're watching City Channel 4. On TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.